Take it off. Now. A country club president forced a 16-year-old girl to strip off her clothes in front of 30 teenagers, accusing her of theft because scholarship kids don't own designer things. The girl stood trembling in her swimsuit while the woman held up her dead mother's jacket like evidence. Then the girl's father, the quiet single dad nobody noticed, played that video in open court. Because the man they dismissed as just another struggling parent was the district attorney who'd been building a criminal case against her for weeks. Before I show you the exact moment when a $10,000 Burberry jacket became Exhibit A in a child endangerment trial, by the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Smash that like button if you believe no child should ever be humiliated for what they wear. And subscribe with that bell on because we're exposing people who abuse power and the underdogs who take them down. This isn't a story about designer clothes. It's about a father who turned grief into justice and proved that real power doesn't come from money or status, but from knowing exactly how the system works. Marcus Hale's office sat 3 miles from the county courthouse, tucked into a strip mall between a tax preparation service and a dentist who advertised payment plans. The building's vinyl siding had faded to the color of old dishwater. His nameplate, scratched plastic with stick-on letters, read, District Attorney, Satellite Office, Millbrook Division. It wasn't where rising prosecutors went to build careers. It was where they went to disappear. He'd requested the transfer himself 6 years ago, 2 months after Rebecca's funeral. The main DA's office downtown had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, conference rooms with Italian leather chairs, prosecutors who tried murder cases that made the evening news. Marcus had been one of them once, the one defense attorneys groaned about when they saw his name on the docket. 40 cases tried, 38 won. A conviction rate that made the Attorney General's office call twice a year, asking if he wanted to move up. He'd said no every time. Now he reviewed shoplifting cases, reviewed misdemeanor trespassing files, signed off on plea deals for first-time drug possession charges while eating microwave leftovers at a desk that wobbled unless he wedged a folded envelope under the front leg. The prosecutors who'd worked under him now ran the felony division. They still called sometimes, asked his opinion on jury selection or cross-examination strategy, their voices careful, like they were talking to someone fragile. Marcus didn't mind. He left at 3:30 every afternoon, beat traffic, and pulled into Ridgemont Preparatory Academy's pickup circle by 4 o'clock. That was the deal he'd made with himself the day he buried his wife. Ivy would never come home to an empty house. She'd never wonder if her father cared more about his career than her. She'd never feel like an afterthought. The other parents didn't know what he did for a living. They knew he drove a 2013 Camry with a crack spreading across the windshield like a river delta. They knew he wore the same 3 gray suits Rebecca had bought him 7 years ago, the cuffs starting to fray. They knew he volunteered for the weekend debate club and asked detailed questions during parent-teacher conferences, his notes written in neat columns on a yellow legal pad. They knew he was just Ivy's dad, the quiet one, the one who always looked a little tired. That was exactly what he wanted them to see. Ivy had her mother's face, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that missed nothing, the kind of focused intelligence that made teachers either love her or find her intimidating. She'd earned a full academic scholarship to Ridgemont when she was 12, the kind of achievement that came with a framed certificate and a congratulatory letter from the headmaster. She studied calculus at the kitchen table while Marcus made dinner. She corrected his grammar when he misquoted Supreme Court cases. She wore her mother's clothes like armor. Rebecca had been a thrifter, back when that meant something different than it did now. Estate sales, consignment shops, vintage boutiques where patient searching turned up Burberry trenches with intact labels and Ferragamo sandals in perfect condition. She'd restored them carefully, repaired loose stitches, conditioned leather, removed stains with techniques she'd learned from YouTube videos. It had been her hobby, her treasure hunt, her way of making their modest income stretch into something that looked effortless. When she died, those clothes became Ivy's inheritance. Marcus never told her to stop wearing them. If putting on her mother's vintage Burberry jacket before school made her feel less alone, he'd have bought her 100 more. The jacket meant Rebecca was still there somehow, still protecting her daughter, still present in the small, tangible ways that grief allowed. The Lakeshore Country Club Junior membership had come through Ridgemont's Youth Achievement Program, a partnership designed to give scholarship students access to networking opportunities and summer enrichment. Ivy had been hesitant. She knew what country clubs meant. She knew the kinds of families who belonged. But Marcus had encouraged her. She needed friends. She needed normal teenage experiences that didn't involve studying alone in their rental house every weekend. He'd thought he was doing the right thing. That assumption shattered 3 weeks later when Ivy came home early on a Saturday afternoon, soaked through, her eyes red and swollen, and locked herself in her bedroom without saying a word. Marcus stood outside Ivy's bedroom door, his hand raised to knock for the 3rd time. He could hear her breathing on the other side, shallow, uneven, the kind of rhythm that came after crying hard enough to make your ribs ache. "Ivy, please, just tell me what happened." Nothing. Just the creak of bed springs as she shifted weight. He'd tried gentle, he'd tried firm, he'd tried the voice he used when she was younger, the one that promised safety and hot chocolate and everything would be okay. None of it worked. She'd walked through the front door dripping wet, her hair plastered to her skull, and gone straight to her room without looking at him. No explanation, no tears, just silence that felt like a wall he couldn't break through. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown number. He almost declined it, but something made him answer. "Mr. Hale?" A girl's voice, young, shaking slightly. "This is Bethany Moss. I'm Ivy's friend from the club." Marcus's chest tightened. "Is she okay? What happened? I need to tell you something. But I'm scared if my parents find out I called." She paused, took a breath that rattled. "Can you just listen? Please?" He moved away from Ivy's door, walked to the kitchen, kept his voice low. "I'm listening." What Bethany described made his vision narrow to a pinpoint. Claire Winslow, president of Lakeshore Country Club, wife of some real estate developer whose name appeared on building permits and donation plaques. She'd approached Ivy at the pool area around 2:30, in front of maybe 30 other teenagers, and pointed at the Burberry jacket draped over Ivy's chair. "Where did you get that?" Claire had asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Ivy had explained it was her mother's, that she'd had it for years. Claire had picked it up, examined the label, then looked at Ivy with something Bethany described as contempt. "Scholarship kids don't own things like that. I don't know whose cabana you took this from, but you're going to tell me right now." Ivy had tried to explain again, showed photos on her phone, pictures of Rebecca wearing the same jacket. Claire hadn't even looked. "Then you'll have no problem removing it and leaving it with me until we verify ownership." When Ivy hesitated, Claire had made it an ultimatum. Remove the jacket and shoes, the Ferragamo sandals that matched another of Rebecca's finds, or be escorted out by security and banned from the club permanently. Bethany's voice cracked as she described what happened next. Ivy, shaking so hard she could barely work the zipper, taking off the jacket, unbuckling the sandals, standing there in her swimsuit, while Claire held up the items like evidence at a crime scene, lecturing about respecting club property and understanding your place. Someone had filmed it. Bethany didn't know who, but she'd seen the phone, seen the red recording indicator. 3 other kids had tried to defend Ivy. Claire had told them to stay out of it unless they wanted their memberships revoked too. The club's general manager, Derek Pine, had shown up after Claire left. He'd apologized quietly, called it a misunderstanding, returned Ivy's things. But when Bethany's mother tried to file a formal complaint that evening, Claire's lawyer sent a letter threatening defamation lawsuits. The video had disappeared from the student's phone after Claire's husband had a conversation with the girl's parents. They worked for his development company. They'd been persuaded to delete it. Marcus listened without interrupting, his free hand gripping the kitchen counter so hard his knuckles went white. "Mr. Hale?" Bethany's voice was small now. "I'm really sorry. I wanted to help, but my mom said we couldn't get involved. That people like Claire Winslow, they don't lose. They just make problems go away." "Thank you for calling," he said quietly. "You did the right thing." He ended the call and stood there in his kitchen, staring at nothing, feeling something cold and precise settle into his chest. Not rage, not yet. Rage was too hot, too unfocused. This was something else, something he recognized from 20 years of courtroom work, from building cases brick by brick until they became monuments to truth that no defense attorney could dismantle. This was clarity. He walked to his home office, a converted second bedroom with a desk, a filing cabinet, and shelves lined with legal texts he'd accumulated over 2 decades. His laptop sat closed on the desk. He opened it, the screen's glow reflecting in his reading glasses as he pulled them from his shirt pocket. Marcus hadn't built a major case in 6 years, hadn't felt that particular hunger for justice that made him work until 3 a.m., cross-referencing statutes and case law, constructing arguments so airtight they felt like mathematics. He'd buried that part of himself with Rebecca, told himself it didn't matter anymore, that being present for Ivy mattered more than winning. But some things couldn't be ignored. He opened a new document, typed a single line at the top, State vs. Winslow, initial case assessment. Then he began reviewing statutes he knew by heart, laws he'd prosecuted under dozens of times, elements of crimes that people like Claire Winslow never imagined applied to them. False imprisonment, assault, child endangerment, coercion, all misdemeanors, all under his direct jurisdiction as a district attorney, all prosecutable. His daughter was still locked in her room, crying over her dead mother's jacket. A woman with money and power and lawyers had humiliated her in public, forced her to strip in front of her peers, and thought the matter was closed because she'd made the evidence disappear. Claire Winslow had no idea what she'd done. She'd just committed multiple crimes against the daughter of the one prosecutor in the county who knew exactly how to make sure she never hurt another child again. Marcus's fingers moved across the keyboard, methodical and certain. If you want to see how a father turned his legal expertise into the perfect trap, subscribe and hit that bell because this case is about to get surgical. The clock on Marcus's desk read 2:47 a.m. when he finished his initial statute review. His coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago. He'd filled 7 pages of his yellow legal pad with notes written in the shorthand he'd developed in law school, abbreviations and symbols that turned complex legal concepts into efficient bullet points. He sat back, removed his reading glasses, and rubbed his eyes. The case was there, all of it. Every element, every statute, every legal hook he needed. What Claire Winslow had done wasn't just cruel, it was criminal. False imprisonment. She'd forced Ivy to comply under threat of forcible removal by security. Assault. The threat itself constituted assault under state law, even without physical contact. Child endangerment. Emotional abuse of a minor in a public setting. Coercion, using her authority to compel action through intimidation. Each charge carried maximum penalties of 6 months to a year. Misdemeanors, not felonies, but that didn't matter. What mattered was jurisdiction. These crimes fell under his authority as a district attorney. This wasn't a civil matter requiring expensive lawyers and years of litigation. This was criminal prosecution, and he held the keys. But knowing he could prosecute and successfully prosecuting were different things. Claire Winslow had money. Her husband's development company had built half the commercial properties in the county. She sat on charity boards with the mayor's wife. 2 country club board members were county commissioners. One was married to a superior court judge. Her lawyer, Marcus had looked him up, was from a white shoe firm that charged $600 an hour and specialized in making problems disappear. If he filed charges, they'd come after him hard. They'd claim prosecutorial misconduct, abuse of authority, personal vendetta. They'd argue he was using his office to settle a private grievance. They'd file motions to dismiss, motions to recuse, motions to suppress. They'd drag this out, make it ugly, make it personal. Unless he built a case so airtight they couldn't touch it. Marcus picked up his phone. It was nearly 3 in the morning, but this couldn't wait. He dialed a number he'd called 100 times over the years, one that went straight to a direct line that bypassed the club's main switchboard. Derek Pine answered on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Hello? Derek, this is District Attorney Marcus Hale. I apologize for the hour, but I need to speak with you about an incident that occurred at Lakeshore Country Club yesterday afternoon." Silence. Then Derek's voice came back, clearer now, alert. "Mr. Hale, I didn't realize Ivy's father was... I'm requesting security footage from your facility, dated yesterday, timestamp 1400 to 1600 hours, pool area cameras. This is part of an active investigation into possible criminal conduct involving a minor. You can provide it voluntarily, or I'll have a subpoena on your desk by 9 a.m. More silence. Marcus could hear Derek breathing, could almost hear him calculating. The club's general manager was in an impossible position, caught between his boss and a prosecutor with legal authority. "I'll have it ready within the hour," Derek said finally. "I'll email it directly to your office." "Thank you. This conversation remains confidential." Marcus ended the call and opened his email, refreshing it every few minutes. True to his word, Derek sent the files 43 minutes later. 4 camera angles, high definition, time-stamped and watermarked with the club's security system's signature. He downloaded them, opened the first file, and watched. The footage was worse than Bethany had described. Claire approached Ivy with the jacket already in her hand, having apparently picked it up without permission. Her body language radiated authority, shoulders back, chin raised, the posture of someone who'd never been told no. Ivy's response was visible even without audio. The immediate defensiveness, the way she pulled back, the gestures that indicated explanation. Claire's dismissal was equally clear, the sharp head shake, the pointing finger, the way she held up the jacket like a prosecutor presenting evidence, except she was prosecutor, judge, and executioner all at once. Then came the moment that made Marcus's hands clench into fists. Ivy removing the jacket. Her hands were shaking so badly she fumbled the zipper twice. She bent to unbuckle the sandals, her wet hair falling forward to hide her face, but her shoulders were trembling. The crowd of teenagers formed a loose semicircle, some watching with obvious discomfort, others with phones raised. When Ivy stood up again, standing in just her swimsuit while Claire examined her mother's clothes, she'd wrapped her arms around herself in a gesture so small and broken it made Marcus's throat close. That was his daughter, 16 years old, brilliant and kind, and still grieving her mother every single day, reduced to that by a woman who thought her money and position made her untouchable. He watched all 4 angles twice, taking notes on timestamps, camera positions, who was visible in each frame. Then he moved to the next file on his list. Jenna Priory. 16 years old, junior member, daughter of Mark and Linda Priory, who both worked in human resources for Winslow Development Corporation. She'd filmed the incident on her phone before Claire's husband made it disappear. Getting that video back would require leverage. Marcus opened a new email, addressed to Mark Priory's work account, publicly listed on the company website, and began typing. "Mr. Priory, this is District Attorney Marcus Hale. I'm conducting a criminal investigation into an incident that occurred at Lakeshore Country Club on date. Your daughter Jenna was present and recorded video evidence on her mobile device. I understand this video was subsequently deleted. I'm requesting that you provide any remaining copies or backups of this footage voluntarily. Please, be advised that destruction of evidence relevant to a criminal investigation constitutes obstruction of justice under State Code, Section 18-2460, punishable by up to 5 years imprisonment. I expect your response within 24 hours. He didn't mention that the statute technically required knowledge of an active investigation at the time of destruction, an element he couldn't yet prove, but Mark Priory didn't need to know that. What he needed to know was that a prosecutor was asking questions and that refusing carried consequences. Marcus sent the email, then sat back and waited. The thumb drive arrived at his office by courier at 11 a.m. the next morning, accompanied by a terse note from the Priory's attorney stating that the video he had been recently located on a backup device and was being provided in the interest of full cooperation with law enforcement. Marcus inserted the drive, opened the file, and pressed play. Jenna had started recording after Claire had already taken the jacket. The audio was clear, teenage voices in the background, the distant splash of someone diving into the pool, and Claire's voice, sharp and cold. Scholarship kids don't own things like that. I don't know whose cabana you took this from, but you're going to tell me right now. There was Ivy's voice, smaller, trying to explain. It's my mother's. I have pictures. Then you'll have no problem removing it and leaving it with me until we verify ownership. The camera stayed steady as Ivy removed the jacket, her hands shaking, as she unbuckled the sandals, as she stood there, humiliated, while Claire delivered her lecture about knowing your place. The video ended. Marcus saved 3 backup copies to different drives, uploaded one to a secure cloud server, and locked the original thumb drive in his office safe. He had everything he needed now. Security footage, cell phone video with audio. the beginning of a case that no expensive lawyer could make disappear. But evidence was only half the battle. He needed witnesses willing to testify. He needed pattern documentation. He needed to prove this wasn't an isolated incident, but systemic behavior. He needed to show Claire Winslow had done this before and would do it again unless someone stopped her. Marcus picked up his phone and dialed Bethany Moss's number. It was time to build the rest of the case. Bethany Moss arrived at Marcus's office on a Wednesday afternoon, her mother beside her. Mrs. Moss looked nervous, the kind of nervous that came from agreeing to something you weren't sure was wise. She kept glancing around the cramped waiting area, like she expected someone to walk in and recognize her. Marcus met them in the small conference room, a space barely large enough for the table and 4 chairs. He'd set up a digital recorder, had his legal pad ready, and wore his prosecutor face, calm, professional, nothing that suggested this was personal. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for them to sit. "Bethany, I know you already told me what happened over the phone, but I need you to tell me again, officially. This is a formal witness statement, and everything you say will be recorded. Do you understand?" Bethany nodded. She was 17, a senior at Ridgemont, daughter of a club board member who'd been carefully neutral when his wife mentioned filing a complaint. She had the look of someone who'd been taught not to make waves. Marcus started the recorder, stated the date and time, identified everyone present. Then he asked Bethany to describe what she'd witnessed. She did. Slowly at first, then with growing confidence. She described Claire's approach, the accusation, Ivy's attempts to explain. She described the threat, comply or be banned, and how Ivy had removed the jacket and sandals while everyone watched. She described Claire's lecture, the way she'd held up the items like trophies, the crowd of teenagers who had stood there helpless. "Did anyone try to intervene?" Marcus asked. "3 of us, me, Jordan Webb, and Alicia Kim. We told Mrs. Winslow she was wrong, that Ivy wouldn't steal anything. She said if we didn't stay out of it, she'd have our memberships revoked too. Did you believe she could do that?" "Yes, she's done it before." Marcus's pen paused. "Explain." Bethany hesitated, glanced at her mother, who gave a small nod. "Last summer, there was a kid named Tyler Henderson. He was a scholarship member too. Mrs. Winslow accused him of vandalizing a golf cart, scratching it with his bike or something. His parents had to hire a lawyer to prove he wasn't even at the club that day. By the time they cleared his name, his family had quit anyway. It was too much." Marcus wrote that down. "Anyone else?" "The Yoon family. Their daughter Minji was at a club event last spring, some kind of scholarship recognition thing. Mrs. Winslow said Minji was being disruptive and had security escort her out. But Minji wasn't doing anything. She was just sitting at a table reading. My mom was there. She saw it." Mrs. Moss spoke up for the first time, her voice quiet. Claire didn't like that Minji wasn't socializing. She said something about scholarship students needing to engage appropriately, or they didn't deserve to be there. When Minji didn't get up and mingle, Claire had her removed. The family tried to complain, but Claire's lawyer sent them a letter threatening a lawsuit if they damaged her reputation. Marcus kept writing. 2 more families, 2 more incidents, a pattern of targeted behavior against scholarship students, all within 18 months, all suppressed through intimidation and legal threats. "Where can I find these families?" he asked. Mrs. Moss pulled out her phone, scrolled through contacts. "I have the Hendersons' number. The Yoons moved to Riverside after the incident, but I can get you their information." She did. Marcus copied everything into his notes, thanked them both, and ended the recording. After they left, he sat alone in the conference room and stared at his legal pad. 3 families, 3 incidents, all involving children, all involving Claire Winslow abusing her authority to humiliate and exclude people she deemed unworthy. This wasn't about Ivy anymore. This was about a woman who'd weaponized her position to hurt vulnerable kids, secure in the knowledge that their families couldn't fight back. That ended now. Marcus spent the next 2 days tracking down the Henderson and Yoon families. The Hendersons still lived in town, in a modest subdivision near the industrial park. He called them, identified himself, and asked if they'd be willing to meet. They agreed, warily. He drove to their house on a Friday evening. Tom Henderson answered the door, a machinist who worked 3rd shift, still in his work clothes. His wife, Sarah, was a substitute teacher. Their son, Tyler, was 14 now, according to the file Marcus had pulled. They sat in a living room that reminded Marcus of his own rental house. Worn furniture, family photos on the walls, the kind of space that was lived in and loved, but would never appear in a magazine. Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Henderson, I'm investigating Claire Winslow for criminal charges related to her treatment of my daughter at Lakeshore Country Club. I understand she accused your son of vandalism last year. Tom Henderson's jaw tightened. She did. Said Tyler scratched her golf cart with his bicycle. Wanted us to pay for repairs, $1,800. We had to hire a lawyer just to prove Tyler wasn't even at the club that day. He'd been at a robotics competition 2 hours away. We had photos, receipts, everything. Did she apologize when you proved he was innocent? Sarah Henderson laughed bitterly. No, her lawyer sent us a letter saying the matter was closed, and we should be grateful they weren't pursuing civil damages for our defamatory accusations. We quit the club the next week. Tyler didn't want to go back anyway. He said every time he walked in, people looked at him like he was a thief. Marcus took notes. Would you be willing to testify about this, in court, if necessary? Tom and Sarah exchanged glances. Will it help? Tom asked. It establishes a pattern. It shows Claire Winslow has a history of targeting scholarship students with false accusations and using her position to avoid accountability. Then yes, Sarah said firmly. If it stops her from doing this to another kid, yes. The Yoon family was harder to reach. They'd moved to Riverside, 40 minutes away, after Minji's incident. Marcus finally connected with them through a mutual contact at Ridgemont. They agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between. Mr. and Mrs. Yoon arrived with Minji, who was 16 now, quiet and composed. They sat across from Marcus in a corner booth, away from other customers. Thank you for meeting with me, Marcus said. I understand what happened to Minji at the club last year was traumatic. Mrs. Yoon's eyes filled with tears. She stopped eating for a week, just stopped. We took her to a doctor, a therapist. She kept saying she didn't belong anywhere, that she was too different, too quiet, too Korean. That woman made my daughter feel like she didn't deserve to exist in that space. Minji stared at her hands, her face carefully blank. What exactly happened? Marcus asked gently. Mr. Yoon explained. Minji had been invited to a scholarship recognition event, a mixer designed to welcome new junior members. She'd attended, sat at a table with a book because she found the noise overwhelming. Claire Winslow had approached her twice, telling her she needed to socialize, that scholarship students had to represent themselves appropriately. When Minji stayed seated, reading, Claire had called security and had her escorted out for disruptive behavior. There were witnesses, Marcus asked. Dozens. But when we tried to file a complaint, Claire's lawyer threatened us. Said if we damaged her reputation, she'd sue us for everything we had. We'd just bought our house. We couldn't risk it. So we left. Marcus closed his notebook. I'm filing criminal charges against Claire Winslow. Your daughter's incident is part of a pattern of discriminatory behavior targeting scholarship students. If you're willing to testify, I can make sure what happened to Minji becomes part of the public record. It won't be hidden anymore. Mrs. Yoon looked at her daughter. Minji? The girl looked up, met Marcus's eyes for the first time. Will it stop her? Yes, Marcus said. It will. Then I'll do it. Marcus drove back to his office as the sun set, his legal pad full of witness statements and documented incidents. 3 families, 3 children, all hurt by the same woman, all too afraid to fight back until now. He opened his case file and added their names to the witness list. Claire Winslow thought her money and lawyers made her untouchable. She was about to learn what happened when someone finally touched back. Marcus sat in his car outside the office for 20 minutes before making the call. The sun had set completely now, leaving only the orange glow of streetlights reflected in his windshield. His phone felt heavy in his hand. He'd built the case, evidence, witnesses, pattern documentation, everything a prosecutor needed to file charges that would survive motions to dismiss. But there was a problem he couldn't ignore, one that would follow him through every stage of this prosecution. The victim was his daughter. Defense counsel would claim bias. They'd argue prosecutorial misconduct, abuse of authority, that he was using his office to settle a personal vendetta. They'd file motions to recuse him, motions to dismiss based on improper motivation. Even if those motions failed, the optics would be terrible. A father prosecuting someone who'd hurt his child looked like revenge, not justice. He needed someone who could vouch for the integrity of the case, someone whose reputation was beyond question, someone who could look at everything he'd built and confirm it was solid, ethical, and prosecutable regardless of his personal connection. He needed Judge Raymond Cortez. Marcus had known Cortez for 20 years. They had worked together when Marcus was a junior prosecutor, and Cortez was still practicing criminal defense, before Cortez took the bench and became one of the most respected judges in the county. Cortez had watched Marcus try 40 cases, watched him win 38 of them, watched him earn a reputation for preparation so thorough that defense attorneys called it surgical. If anyone could assess this case objectively, it was Cortez. Marcus dialed. The judge answered on the third ring. "Marcus Hale, it's been a while." "Judge, I need to talk to you, off the record." A pause. "What's wrong?" "Not over the phone. Can we meet?" "I'm free now. You know where." They'd had this conversation before. Off-the-record discussions required neutral territory, somewhere away from courthouse offices and formal settings. The place they'd always used was a diner called Helen's, 20 minutes outside town, the kind of establishment that served breakfast all day and never asked questions about why a prosecutor and a judge were meeting at odd hours. Marcus drove there in silence, his mind running through how to present this. He couldn't be emotional. He had to lay out the facts clinically, show Cortez the case as a case, not as a father's rage given legal form. Cortez was already in a corner booth when Marcus arrived, a cup of coffee cooling in front of him. He was 61, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had seen everything courtrooms could produce and remained unmoved by theatrics. Marcus slid into the opposite seat. "Tell me," Cortez said simply. So Marcus did. He started with the incident, what happened to Ivy, the forced removal of clothing, the public humiliation. He described it factually, using the language of statutes: false imprisonment, assault, child endangerment, coercion. He explained the evidence he'd collected: security footage, cell phone video, witness statements. He detailed the pattern of behavior, the Henderson and Yoon families, the systematic targeting of scholarship students. He laid it all out like a case file, organized and methodical. Cortez listened without interrupting, his hands folded on the table. When Marcus finished, the judge was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You want to prosecute this yourself? Yes? The victim is your daughter? Yes. Defense will claim you're abusing your authority. I know. That's why I'm here." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "I need you to tell me if this case is solid enough to withstand that scrutiny. If you look at the evidence and see anything that wouldn't hold up, anything that looks like overreach or personal vendetta, I'll recuse myself. I'll hand it to another ADA. But, Judge, I don't trust anyone else to do this right. Claire Winslow has money, connections, and lawyers who'll bury this in motions. I need someone who won't blink." Cortez studied him. "What you're really asking is for me to hold you accountable." "Yes." "You want me to scrutinize this case like you're the one on trial." "Exactly. What happens next will show you why expensive lawyers fear prosecutors who know every loophole. Hit that subscribe button, because this legal strategy is masterclass level." Cortez picked up his coffee, took a slow sip, set it down. "Walk me through the statutes again, every element." Marcus did. False imprisonment required unlawful restraint through force or threat of force. Claire had threatened Ivy with removal by security and permanent ban, compelling compliance through intimidation. Check. Assault required intentional creation of reasonable fear of imminent harm. The threat of physical removal by security personnel constituted such fear. Check. Child endangerment required conduct that placed a minor at substantial risk of emotional harm. Public humiliation, forced stripping in front of peers, targeting based on socioeconomic status, all documented, all witnessed. Check. Coercion required compelling action through threat of harm. Claire had forced Ivy to remove clothing under threat of consequences. Check. Your evidence? Cortez asked. 4 security camera angles, time-stamped and authenticated. Cell phone video with audio of the threats and accusations. 5 witness statements, including 3 unrelated families documenting pattern behavior. Physical evidence. The jacket and sandals still in my possession, with documentation proving ownership. Chain of custody? Impeccable. Everything obtained through proper channels or voluntary production. I have written authorization from the club for security footage, voluntary surrender of the cell phone video, with attorney confirmation, recorded witness statements with proper identification and consent. Cortez drummed his fingers on the table. Potential weaknesses? Marcus had anticipated this. Defense will argue misunderstanding, that Claire was attempting to protect club property in good faith. They'll claim Ivy misinterpreted the situation, that the removal of clothing was Ivy's choice, not compelled action. Your counter? The cell phone video destroys the good faith argument. Claire's exact words were, "You'll have no problem removing them and leaving them with me until we verify ownership." That's explicit compulsion, not request. The security footage shows Ivy's visible distress, trembling hands, defensive posture, and the pattern evidence proves this wasn't isolated confusion, but deliberate targeting of scholarship students. Cortez nodded slowly. Bias argument? That's the real vulnerability, Marcus admitted. I can't eliminate it, but I can mitigate it. I've requested independent review by the State Attorney General's office before filing. I'll submit all evidence and witness statements for their assessment. If they sign off, it establishes external validation that the case has merit independent of my personal involvement. That's smart, Cortez leaned back. What about recusal? Prosecutors aren't required to recuse when family members are victims, but you could voluntarily. I could, and if you tell me I should, I will. But no one else will fight this the way it needs to be fought. Claire Winslow's lawyers will file every motion in the book. They'll delay, obfuscate, try to bury this in procedure. I know how to counter that. I've done it 100 times. But never when it was personal. Marcus met his eyes. No, never when it was personal. Cortez was silent for what felt like an eternity. He looked at Marcus the way judges look at defendants before sentencing, assessing character, weighing credibility, searching for truth beneath surface words. Finally, he spoke. File your charges. I'll make sure everything's by the book. If defense files a motion to dismiss based on prosecutorial misconduct, I'll review it with absolute scrutiny. If they're right, I'll grant it. If they're wrong, I'll deny it. But Marcus, his voice hardened slightly. You cross one ethical line, make one procedural mistake, show one hint of letting this become personal instead of legal, and I will shut you down so fast your head will spin. Understood? Understood. And Marcus, request that AG review. Get it in writing. Make this bulletproof. Marcus nodded. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by the weight of what came next. He had judicial blessing to proceed, but that blessing came with conditions that could end his career if he failed to meet them. He stood, extended his hand. Cortez shook it. Thank you, Judge. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when this is over and you've done it right. Marcus walked back to his car, sat behind the wheel, and pulled out his phone. He drafted an email to the State Attorney General's office, requesting independent review of evidence and charges in an upcoming prosecution involving potential conflict of interest. He attached every document, every video file, every witness statement. He explained the situation clearly. Victim was his minor daughter. Defendant was wealthy and politically connected. Case was solid, but optics were problematic. Requesting external validation before filing. He hit send. Then he drove home to tell Ivy that justice was coming, and it would be done right. The response from the Attorney General's office arrived 11 days later. Marcus had checked his email obsessively during that time. Early morning before Ivy woke up, during lunch breaks, late at night when sleep wouldn't come. Each day without response felt like a door closing. Then, on a Tuesday morning, while he was reviewing a plea agreement for a shoplifting case, the email appeared in his inbox. Subject: Request for independent review. Case assessment complete. His hand trembled slightly as he clicked it open. The AG's office had assigned a senior prosecutor named Victoria Chen to review his evidence package. Her assessment was thorough. 8 pages analyzing every statute, every piece of evidence, every witness statement. She'd identified the same potential weaknesses Marcus had anticipated and concluded they were manageable with proper presentation. Her final paragraph was what mattered. The evidence supports all charged offenses. The case demonstrates prosecutorial merit independent of the filer's personal relationship to the victim. Pattern documentation establishes defendant's conduct as systematic rather than isolated. Recommend proceeding with charges. This office finds no evidence of improper motivation or abuse of prosecutorial authority. Marcus read it 3 times, then printed it and locked it in his case file. He had everything now: evidence, witnesses, pattern documentation, and independent validation from the state's highest prosecutorial authority. Claire Winslow's lawyers could scream bias all they wanted. The AG's office had already determined the case had merit on its own. It was time. He spent the next 2 days drafting the charging documents with painstaking precision. Every word mattered. Every citation had to be perfect. Defense counsel would scrutinize this complaint, looking for any procedural flaw, any hint of sloppiness they could exploit. Marcus gave them nothing. Count 1. Assault and battery on a minor in violation of state code, section 18.257, element by element, supported by video evidence and witness testimony. Count 2. False imprisonment in violation of state code, section 18.247, unlawful restraint through threat of force, compelled compliance under duress. Count 3. Child endangerment in violation of state code, section 18.2.371.1, conduct placing a minor at substantial risk of emotional harm in a public setting. Count 4. Coercion in violation of state code, section 18.260, compelling action through threat of adverse consequences. Defendant, Claire Elizabeth Winslow. Victim, minor child. IH, age 16, identity protected per juvenile victim protocols. He listed his evidence exhibits: security footage, 4 angles, cell phone video with audio, 5 witness statements, pattern documentation from Henderson and Yoon incidents, physical evidence, Burberry jacket and Ferragamo sandals with ownership documentation, club incident reports. He attached the AG's independent review as Appendix A. On Thursday morning, 3 weeks and 2 days after Ivy came home crying, Marcus filed the charges with the county clerk's office. The arraignment was automatically scheduled for Judge Raymond Cortez's courtroom. Criminal cases involving minors received expedited calendar placement. Date set: 11 days from filing. Marcus walked back to his office and called Ivy. She was at school, between classes. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" "I filed charges against Claire Winslow this morning." Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, "Really? Really. The arraignment is next Thursday. You don't have to be there. Victim's not required at arraignment. But I wanted you to know it's happening." What's going to happen to her?" "That depends on the judge and jury. But she'll have to answer for what she did. In court. Publicly." More silence. "Thank you, Dad." His throat tightened. "You don't have to thank me. This is what should happen when someone hurts a child." After he hung up, Marcus sat at his desk and allowed himself one moment of satisfaction. Then he got back to work. Filing charges was just the beginning. Now came the hard part. The news broke 48 hours later. Local courthouse reporters monitored filing systems for high-profile cases involving prominent community members. Claire Winslow's name triggered immediate attention. Country club president charged with child endangerment ran as the lead story in Saturday's paper. The article was carefully written, no victim identification, just the basic facts. Claire Elizabeth Winslow, president of Lakeshore Country Club, had been charged with multiple misdemeanors related to an incident involving a minor at the club facility. Arraignment scheduled for Thursday. Marcus's phone started ringing Sunday morning. Other prosecutors from the main office, curious about the case. Defense attorneys he'd worked with over the years, asking if this was really happening. Even the local news station called, requesting comment. He declined all interviews. The charges speak for themselves. This matter will be addressed in court. Claire Winslow's response came Monday afternoon via courier. A motion to dismiss, filed by Bernard Ashcroft of Ashcroft and Sterling, the white shoe firm Marcus had researched. The motion was 63 pages long, supported by 17 case citations, and argued every angle Marcus had anticipated: prosecutorial misconduct, abuse of authority, personal vendetta, violation of defendants' due process rights, improper use of office for private grievance. The prosecutor's daughter was the alleged victim, creating irreconcilable conflict of interest requiring immediate dismissal. Marcus read it twice, made notes in the margins, then began drafting his response. He had 30 pages written by midnight. Case law showing prosecutors had no obligation to recuse when family members were victims, provided they followed standard procedures. Documentation proving every piece of evidence was obtained properly through lawful channels. The AG's independent review showing the case had merit beyond personal involvement. Precedent establishing that discomfort with a prosecutor's motivation didn't constitute grounds for dismissal if the evidence supported the charges. He cited 15 cases where courts had rejected similar defense arguments. He attached affidavits from every witness confirming their statements were voluntary and accurate. He included the AG's letter prominently, highlighting Victoria Chen's conclusion that the case demonstrated prosecutorial merit independent of personal relationship. His final paragraph was simple. The defense asks this court to create a rule that would prevent any prosecutor with a family member who is a crime victim from seeking justice on that victim's behalf. Such a rule would create a perverse incentive for criminals to target prosecutors' families. Knowing those crimes could never be prosecuted, this court should reject that argument and allow the evidence to be heard. He filed the response Wednesday afternoon, 24 hours before the arraignment. Thursday morning arrived cold and gray. Marcus wore his best suit, the one Rebecca had bought him for their 10th anniversary, the one he saved for major trials. He arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early, reviewed his notes one final time, and walked into Cortez's courtroom with his case file under his arm. Claire Winslow was already there, seated at the defense table with Bernard Ashcroft and 2 junior associates. She wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly salary, her hair styled perfectly, her expression radiating confident disdain. She looked like someone who'd never faced real consequences in her life. That was about to change. The gallery was full, journalists in the back rows, courthouse regulars who followed interesting cases, and a handful of people Marcus recognized as club members, probably there to support Claire. Mrs. Moss sat in the middle section, her presence quiet but deliberate. Judge Cortez entered. Everyone rose. "Be seated. We're here for arraignment in State versus Winslow. Counsel, state your appearances." Marcus stood. "Marcus Hale for the Commonwealth, Your Honor." Ashcroft stood, his voice smooth and practiced. "Bernard Ashcroft of Ashcroft and Sterling for the defendant, Your Honor. We've filed a motion to dismiss based on prosecutorial misconduct and conflict of interest. We'd ask the court to hear that motion before proceeding to arraignment." Cortez looked at Marcus. "Commonwealth's response? Filed yesterday, Your Honor. The motion lacks merit and should be denied." "I've read both submissions." Cortez's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "Mr. Ashcroft, your argument is that Mr. Hale cannot prosecute this case because the alleged victim is his daughter. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor. It creates an irreconcilable conflict that violates my client's due process rights. And yet you cite no case law requiring recusal under these circumstances." "The circumstances speak for themselves, Your Honor. This is a personal vendetta disguised as prosecution." Cortez picked up Marcus's response. "The Commonwealth obtained independent review from the Attorney General's office. That review concluded the case has prosecutorial merit independent of any personal relationship. How do you address that?" Ashcroft hesitated. "The AG's review doesn't eliminate the appearance of impropriety." "Appearance isn't grounds for dismissal, Mr. Ashcroft. Evidence is. Does your client dispute that the incident occurred?" "We dispute the characterization." "That's not what I asked. Did the incident occur? Was your client present? Did she interact with the minor victim as described in the complaint?" Another hesitation. "The interaction occurred, but then there's a factual basis for these charges, and the question of guilt or innocence should be determined by a jury, not dismissed on procedural grounds. Motion denied." Claire Winslow's expression fractured for just a moment, a flicker of uncertainty that vanished behind rigid composure. Ashcroft's jaw tightened, but he recovered smoothly. "Your Honor, we respectfully request—" "Your motion is denied, Mr. Ashcroft. We are proceeding to arraignment." Cortez looked at Claire directly. "Ms. Winslow, please rise." She stood, her shoulders back, chin raised. Even now, she radiated the confidence of someone who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. Cortez read the charges aloud. Each one landed in the courtroom like a physical weight: assault and battery on a minor, false imprisonment, child endangerment, coercion. When he finished, the silence felt absolute. "How does your client plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor." Ashcroft's voice was firm, practiced. "Preliminary hearing is set for 2 weeks from today. Bail conditions: defendant is to have no contact with the victim or any witnesses listed in the Commonwealth's filing, no contact with Lakeshore Country Club junior members or scholarship program participants. Violation of these conditions will result in immediate arrest." "Do you understand, Ms. Winslow?" Claire's voice was tight. "Yes." "Court is adjourned." The gavel fell. Marcus gathered his files as Claire and her legal team swept out of the courtroom, Ashcroft already on his phone, probably calling the public relations firm they'd inevitably hired. The journalists rushed out after them, hoping for a statement. Mrs. Moss approached Marcus as he stood. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Bethany's been so scared, but seeing this actually happen—" "Thank you." He nodded. "She's brave for coming forward. Tell her I said so." As he walked back to his office, Marcus allowed himself a small measure of satisfaction. The first hurdle was cleared. Claire couldn't make this disappear with motions and legal maneuvering. The case was moving forward, and soon it would be public in ways her money couldn't control. But the preliminary hearing would be different. That's where he'd have to present actual evidence, where Ashcroft would cross-examine witnesses, where the strength of the case would be tested before a judge who'd decide if there was enough to proceed to trial. Marcus had 2 weeks to prepare, and he intended to use every minute. The first step was organizing his evidence presentation. He needed to tell a story, not just show facts, but construct a narrative that made Claire's guilt undeniable. He'd start with the security footage, establish the timeline and setting, then the cell phone video with audio, letting Claire's own words condemn her, then Bethany's testimony, putting a human voice to what the cameras captured. Finally, the pattern evidence, Henderson and Yoon, showing this wasn't a mistake, but deliberate systematic abuse. He spent 3 days rehearsing his presentation, timing each segment, anticipating objections, preparing responses. He met with Bethany twice more, walking her through what cross-examination would feel like, how Ashcroft would try to shake her testimony. She was nervous, but determined. "I keep thinking about Minji," she said during their second prep session, "about how she stopped eating because of what Mrs. Winslow did. If I don't testify, it's like saying what happened to her didn't matter." "It matters," Marcus said, "and you testifying makes sure everyone knows it." He reached out to Derek Pine, the club's general manager, and formally subpoenaed him. Derek arrived at Marcus's office looking uncomfortable, clearly caught between his job and his conscience. "I don't want to hurt the club," Derek said. "I'm not asking you to hurt the club. I'm asking you to tell the truth about what happened." Derek rubbed his face. "Claire's been difficult for years. The board knows it, but she brings in donations, connections. They've looked the other way. Will you testify to that? If I'm subpoenaed, I don't have a choice, do I?" "No," Marcus said. "You don't." The preliminary hearing arrived faster than expected. Marcus walked into Cortez's courtroom carrying 3 evidence binders, a laptop with the video files queued, and the quiet confidence of someone who'd prepared for every possible contingency. Claire sat at the defense table, flanked by her legal team, her expression carefully neutral. But Marcus noticed small things: the way she gripped her designer handbag, the slight tension in her shoulders. She was worried now. Good. Cortez called the hearing to order. "Mr. Hale, present your evidence." Marcus stood. "Your Honor, the Commonwealth will demonstrate through video evidence, witness testimony, and pattern documentation that the defendant engaged in criminal conduct against a minor victim on the date in question. We'll show this conduct was intentional, targeted, and part of a systematic pattern of abuse against scholarship students at Lakeshore Country Club." He started with the security footage. The courtroom monitor flickered to life, showing the pool area in high-definition clarity. Timestamp: 14/23/47. Claire approached Ivy, already holding the Burberry jacket. Even without audio, her body language was aggressive, pointing, demanding. Marcus narrated clinically. "The defendant approaches the victim without permission, having already removed the victim's property from her chair. Note the victim's immediate defensive posture. Timestamp: 14 into 24. 12. The defendant makes an accusatory gesture. The victim attempts to explain. The defendant dismisses her. He switched camera angles, showing the crowd beginning to gather, teenage faces turning toward the confrontation, phones coming out, the circle forming. Timestamp 14:26:33. The victim removes her jacket. Note the trembling in her hands, visible even at this distance. She fumbles the zipper twice. This is not voluntary compliance. This is a minor child acting under duress. The courtroom was silent except for the video's timestamp beeping forward. Marcus watched the gallery. Several people had leaned forward, intent on the screen. One woman, a club member, based on her earlier position near Claire, had her hand over her mouth. He switched to the cell phone video. Jenna's footage started later, but included audio. Claire's voice filled the courtroom, clear and cold. Scholarship kids don't own things like that. I don't know whose cabana you took this from, but you're going to tell me right now. Ivy's voice smaller, younger than her 16 years. It's my mother's. I have pictures. Then you'll have no problem removing it and leaving it with me until we verify ownership. The sound of Ivy's breath catching, the rustling of fabric as she complied. Claire's voice again, lecturing about knowing your place and respecting club property. Marcus paused the video. That, Your Honor, is the defendant's own voice compelling a minor child to remove her clothing through explicit threat. Not a request, not a misunderstanding. A command backed by the implicit threat of forcible removal and permanent exclusion. He called Bethany Moss to the stand. She walked to the witness box with visible nervousness but steady steps. Marcus took her through the incident methodically, what she saw, what she heard, how Ivy reacted. Describe the victim's emotional state, he said. She was shaking, like her whole body, and crying, but trying not to. She kept her head down so people wouldn't see her face, but her shoulders were shaking. Did you attempt to intervene? Yes. Me and 2 other kids told Mrs. Winslow she was wrong, that Ivy wouldn't steal anything. Mrs. Winslow said if we didn't stay out of it, she'd have our memberships revoked too. Did you believe she had the authority to do that? Yes. She's the president. She does whatever she wants. Ashcroft's cross-examination was aggressive but careful. He tried to suggest Bethany was biased, that her friendship with Ivy colored her perception. Bethany held firm. I know what I saw. Ivy was humiliated. Mrs. Winslow did that on purpose. On purpose? You can read minds? I can read faces. Mrs. Winslow enjoyed it. Ashcroft moved to strike the answer as speculation. Cortez allowed it. Credibility assessments were the jury's job, not his. Marcus called Derek Pine next. The club manager looked miserable, but answered truthfully. Yes, Claire had a history of complaints about scholarship members. Yes, there'd been incidents. Before. Yes, the board had received complaints about her behavior. Did the board take action on those complaints? Derek hesitated. No, Mrs. Winslow is influential. She brings in significant donations. So her money protected her from accountability. Objection, Ashcroft said. Argumentative. Sustained. Rephrase, Mr. Hale. Did her financial contributions to the club influence the board's decision not to act on complaints? Derek's voice was barely above a whisper. Yes. Finally, Marcus presented the pattern evidence. Tom Henderson testified about Tyler's false accusation. Mrs. Yoon testified about Minji's forced removal, her voice breaking when she described her daughter's week of not eating. Mrs. Winslow made my daughter feel like she didn't deserve to exist, Mrs. Yoon said, because she was quiet, because she was different, because she was Korean and on scholarship. Ashcroft objected repeatedly. Relevance, prejudice, speculation. Cortez overruled him each time. Pattern evidence was admissible to show intent and systematic behavior. When Marcus rested, he'd presented 90 minutes of evidence that painted an undeniable picture. Claire Winslow had systematically targeted and abused scholarship students, using her position to humiliate children who couldn't fight back. Ashcroft stood for closing argument. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. My client was attempting to protect club property. The alleged victim misinterpreted. The video contradicts that assertion, Mr. Ashcroft. Cortez's voice was flat. I watched your client force a child to remove clothing in public. I heard her threaten that child. I heard testimony from multiple witnesses establishing a pattern. There's more than sufficient evidence to bind this over for trial. He paused, looked directly at Claire. Ms. Winslow, you'll stand trial on all 4 counts. Trial date is set for 6 weeks from today. The gavel fell again. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters when Marcus exited through the main entrance. He'd expected this. Preliminary hearings involving prominent defendants always drew media attention. But the sheer number of cameras surprised him. 10, maybe 12 different outlets, plus independent journalists with smartphones and recorders. Claire Winslow stood at the center of the scrum, Ashcroft beside her, both speaking into a forest of microphones. Marcus caught fragments as he descended the steps. Complete mischaracterization of events. Claire's voice smooth and practiced. Looking forward to clearing my name. Prosecutorial overreach motivated by personal animus. Ashcroft, equally polished. Marcus walked past without comment. One reporter broke from the pack, jogging to catch up. Mr. Hale, do you have a response to Ms. Winslow's claim that this prosecution is personally motivated? He stopped, turned. The evidence speaks for itself. This matter will be resolved in court, not on courthouse steps. Is it true the victim is your daughter? Victim identities in cases involving minors are protected by law. I won't confirm or deny anything that could compromise that protection. He continued to his car, ignoring the follow-up questions shouted at his back. Let Claire have her press conference. Let Ashcroft spin this as persecution of the wealthy. It wouldn't matter once a jury saw the videos. The next 6 weeks became a controlled countdown. Marcus prepared for trial with the same methodical precision he'd brought to every major case of his career. He refined his witness list, cutting anyone whose testimony might be redundant or vulnerable to effective cross-examination. He organized his evidence exhibits in the order he'd present them, creating a narrative flow that built inevitably toward guilt. He met with Bethany 4 more times, walking her through every possible question Ashcroft might ask. They practiced maintaining composure under aggressive questioning, practiced redirecting hostile framing back to the facts. Bethany grew stronger each session. I'm not scared anymore, she told him during their final prep. I want people to know what she did. The Yoon family flew back from Riverside for trial prep. Minji was quieter than her parents, but when Marcus asked if she was ready to testify, she met his eyes directly. I've been ready since the day she kicked me out. I just didn't think anyone would listen. They'll listen now, Marcus promised. Ashcroft's trial strategy became clear through pre-trial motions. He filed to exclude the pattern evidence, Henderson and Yoon incidents, arguing it was prejudicial and not directly relevant to the charged conduct. Marcus opposed, citing established precedent allowing pattern evidence to prove intent and absence of mistake. Cortez ruled in Marcus's favor. Ashcroft filed to exclude portions of the cell phone video, claiming audio quality issues made Claire's words unclear. Marcus submitted an enhanced audio version prepared by the state forensics lab. Every word was crystal clear. Motion denied. Ashcroft filed to limit the Commonwealth's characterization of Claire's conduct, arguing that terms like humiliation and targeting were inflammatory. Cortez called it argument, not evidence, and told both sides to let the jury decide what the conduct meant. Claire's public relations campaign intensified. Opinion pieces appeared in the local paper, defending her as a dedicated community volunteer being victimized by an overzealous prosecutor. Letters to the editor split along predictable lines, wealthy club members defending her, working-class families calling for accountability. Marcus ignored all of it. Public opinion didn't matter. Only the 12 people in the jury box mattered. Jury selection took 2 days. Ashcroft used his strikes to eliminate anyone who'd expressed anti-wealth sentiment during voir dire, anyone who seemed sympathetic to underdog narratives. Marcus struck. Anyone with country club memberships, anyone who'd contributed to Claire's charitable foundations, anyone who seemed overly deferential to authority. They ended up with 12 jurors who were neither rich nor poor, neither obviously sympathetic nor obviously hostile. Middle-income people with regular jobs, a teacher, an accountant, a nurse, 2 small business owners, a retired factory supervisor, people who worked for a living and raised families and might understand what it meant when someone with power hurt someone without it. Opening statements began on a Monday morning. The courtroom gallery was full again. Journalists, courthouse regulars, club members on both sides of the issue. Marcus spotted Mrs. Moss in the third row. 2 rows behind her sat 3 people he recognized from the Yoon family photos. Ashcroft went first. His opening was smooth, practiced, designed to reframe Claire as the victim of a misunderstanding weaponized by an angry father. Ladies and gentlemen, Claire Winslow dedicated her life to community service. She volunteers countless hours, raises millions for charity, and takes her responsibilities seriously, perhaps too seriously. On the day in question, she saw what appeared to be stolen property and attempted to address it appropriately. Did she make a mistake? Perhaps. But making a mistake isn't a crime. The prosecution wants you to believe my client is a monster who deliberately humiliated a child. The evidence will show something far different. A well-intentioned woman trying to do her job, whose actions were misinterpreted by a teenager who felt embarrassed. He gestured toward Marcus. The prosecutor has an obvious conflict of interest here. His daughter felt humiliated, and instead of handling it appropriately through club channels, he's using his office to seek revenge. That's not justice. That's abuse of power. Marcus stood for his opening. He didn't gesture dramatically or raise his voice. He simply told the truth. The defendant forced a 16-year-old girl to remove her clothing in front of 30 teenagers because she didn't believe a scholarship student deserved to own nice things. You'll see video of this. You'll hear the defendant's own voice making threats. You'll hear from witnesses who watched it happen. And you'll hear from other families whose children the defendant targeted the same way. Because this wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern. He paused. Let that sink in. The defense will argue this was a misunderstanding, but you can't misunderstand your own words when they're recorded on video. You can't accidentally humiliate a child in front of her peers. And you can't claim good intentions when multiple families tell you this is how you always behave. He looked at each juror in turn. This case isn't complicated. Watch the videos. Listen to the witnesses. Ask yourself one question. Did the defendant force a minor child to remove clothing through threats and intimidation? The evidence will prove she did. And when you've seen that evidence, I'll ask you to hold her accountable. This is why we expose bullies publicly. Subscribe because you need to see how this ends. Marcus returned to his table. Ashcroft was already conferring with his associates, probably adjusting strategy based on Marcus's opening. It didn't matter. You couldn't adjust away from video evidence. Mr. Hale, call your first witness, Cortez said. The Commonwealth calls Bethany Moss. Bethany walked to the witness stand with her head high. She looked at the jury, not at Claire. Marcus took her through her testimony the same way he had during the preliminary hearing, methodically, chronologically, letting the facts speak. What did you see at approximately 2:30 that afternoon? Mrs. Winslow approached Ivy, the victim, holding Ivy's jacket. She accused her of stealing it. How did she accuse her? She said, scholarship kids don't own things like that. She said Ivy must have taken it from someone's cabana. What happened next? Ivy tried to explain it was her mom's jacket. She showed Mrs. Winslow pictures on her phone. Mrs. Winslow didn't even look. She said Ivy had to take off the jacket and shoes and leave them until they verified she didn't steal them. Did Ivy comply? She didn't want to, but Mrs. Winslow said if she didn't, security would escort her out and she'd be banned forever. So Ivy took them off. She was shaking so hard she could barely work the zipper. Marcus played the security footage. The jury watched in silence as Ivy removed the jacket, unbuckled the sandals, stood there in her swimsuit, while Claire lectured and the crowd watched. 2 jurors, the teacher and the nurse, had visible reactions. The teacher's jaw tightened. The nurse shook her head slightly. Marcus played the cell phone video. Next. Claire's voice filled the courtroom, cold and absolute. Then you'll have no problem removing it and leaving it with me until we verify ownership. He let it play through to the end, through Claire's lecture about knowing your place, through the sound of Ivy's breath catching. When it ended, the courtroom was silent. Ashcroft's cross-examination of Bethany was aggressive but ineffective. He tried to suggest she was exaggerating, that her friendship with Ivy made her biased. Bethany remained calm. I'm telling you what I saw, what everyone saw. Ivy was humiliated, and Mrs. Winslow did it on purpose. You can't know what was in my client's mind. I know what I saw on her face. She enjoyed it. Marcus called Derek Pine. The club manager's testimony established Claire's history of complaints, the board's failure to act, the pattern of targeting scholarship students. Ashcroft tried to impeach him by suggesting he was disgruntled, that he'd been reprimanded by Claire before. "Isn't it true my client criticized your performance last year?" "Yes." "And you resented that criticism?" Derek looked at Claire directly. "I resented watching her hurt kids and being told to stay quiet about it." The second day of trial began with Tom Henderson's testimony. Marcus had debated whether to include the pattern witnesses. Ashcroft would argue they were prejudicial, that past incidents shouldn't influence the jury's view of the charged conduct. But the pattern was essential. It proved Claire's actions weren't a mistake, but deliberate, systematic abuse. Tom took the stand wearing a button-down shirt and tie, clearly uncomfortable in formal clothes. His hands were calloused from machinist work, a detail Marcus knew the jury would notice. "Mr. Henderson, how did you come to know the defendant?" "Our son Tyler was a junior member at Lakeshore Country Club through the scholarship program. Last summer, Mrs. Winslow accused him of vandalizing her golf cart." "What was the basis for her accusation?" "She said he'd scratched it with his bicycle, wanted us to pay $1,800 for repairs." "Was your son responsible for the damage?" "No, he wasn't even at the club that day. He was at a robotics competition 2 hours away. We had photos, receipts, a dozen witnesses." "What happened when you proved he was innocent?" Tom's voice hardened. "Nothing. Her lawyer sent us a letter saying we should be grateful they weren't suing us for defamation. We quit the club the next week. Tyler wouldn't go back anyway. He said every time he walked in there, people looked at him like he was a thief." Ashcroft's cross-examination tried to distinguish the incidents. Different child, different circumstances, no relevance to the current charges. Tom didn't budge. "It's the same pattern. She targets scholarship kids because she thinks they don't belong. My son, the victim in this case. How many others before someone finally stopped her?" Marcus called Mrs. Yoon next. She testified about Minji's forced removal from the club event, her daughter's subsequent refusal to eat, the week of emotional devastation that followed. Her voice broke when she described finding Minji crying in her room, saying she didn't belong anywhere. "Mrs. Winslow made my daughter feel worthless," she said quietly. Because she was quiet. Because she didn't socialize the way Mrs. Winslow thought she should. Because she was different. Ashcroft tried to suggest Mrs. Yoon was exaggerating her daughter's reaction, that teenagers were naturally dramatic. Mrs. Yoon looked at him with something close to contempt. "You don't know what it's like to watch your child stop eating. To watch them believe they're not good enough because someone with power told them so. Don't you dare minimize what that woman did." The jury was leaning forward now. The nurse had tears in her eyes. The retired factory supervisor looked at Claire with open disgust. Marcus rested the Commonwealth's case on the afternoon of the second day. He'd presented video evidence showing the incident, witness testimony corroborating the videos, and pattern evidence proving Claire's conduct was systematic and intentional. The case was airtight. Ashcroft called Claire to the stand for the defense. It was a calculated risk. Putting a defendant on the stand always was, but Claire's wealthy, polished presentation was her best defense against the prosecution's narrative. She walked to the witness box with perfect posture, wearing a navy suit that screamed respectability. Under Ashcroft's gentle questioning, she presented herself as a dedicated volunteer trying to protect club property. "I saw what appeared to be expensive designer items unattended," she said, her voice measured and calm. "Given the club's history of theft issues, I felt obligated to investigate. I approached the young woman, I didn't know she was a scholarship student at the time, and asked where she'd obtained the items. Did you accuse her of theft? I asked her to verify ownership. When she became defensive, I offered to hold the items until we could confirm they belonged to her. I thought I was being helpful. Did you force her to remove the clothing? Absolutely not. I suggested she leave them with me temporarily. She chose to remove them. That was her decision. It was smooth, practiced, and completely contradicted by the video evidence. Marcus knew the jury would see through it, but Ashcroft was betting on Claire's polish and respectability overriding their eyes and ears. Marcus's cross-examination was surgical. "Ms. Winslow, you testified you didn't know the victim was a scholarship student. Is that correct?" "That's correct." Marcus played a clip from the cell phone video. Claire's voice, Scholarship kids don't own things like that. That's your voice, isn't it? Claire's composure cracked slightly. Yes, but you said scholarship kids before the victim identified herself as a scholarship student. So you did know. You lied to this jury just now. I misspoke. You meant exactly what you said. You targeted her because she was a scholarship student. Marcus pulled up the security footage, paused on the moment Claire pointed at Ivy. This gesture here? What are you saying in this moment? I don't recall the exact words. You're telling her to remove the jacket, aren't you? Because we have audio from another angle that captures you saying, then you'll have no problem removing it. Claire's jaw tightened. I was trying to resolve the situation. By forcing a 16-year-old to strip in front of her peers? She wasn't stripping, she was removing her clothing in public because you threatened her. Yes or no? Did you tell her she'd be escorted out and banned if she didn't comply? I may have mentioned that was a possibility if... Yes or no, Ms. Winslow? A long pause. Yes. So you threatened a minor child with forcible removal and permanent exclusion unless she removed her clothing. That's what happened. That's not how I intended it. Marcus pulled up the Henderson incident report. You accused Tyler Henderson of vandalism. He proved he wasn't even at the club that day. Did you apologize? The matter was resolved. That's not what I asked. Did you apologize to a 14-year-old boy you falsely accused of a crime? No. Did you apologize to the Yoon family after having their daughter forcibly removed from a club event? That was a separate matter. Did you apologize, Ms. Winslow? Yes or no? No. Because you don't believe you did anything wrong in any of these incidents. You believe your position gives you the right to humiliate children who don't meet your standards. Isn't that true? Ashcroft objected. Argumentative. Sustained. But the damage was done. The jury had heard Claire admit to the threats, admit to targeting scholarship students, admit she'd never apologized to any of the families she'd hurt. Her Polish had cracked, revealing the arrogance underneath. Marcus sat down. Ashcroft tried to rehabilitate her on redirect, but the jury had already made up their minds. You could see it in their faces. Closing arguments came the next morning. Ashcroft gave it everything, painted Claire as a well-intentioned volunteer, suggested the prosecution was motivated by personal grudge, argued that mistakes shouldn't be criminalized. Marcus stood for his closing and kept it simple. You watched the videos. You heard the defendant's own voice threatening a child. You heard her admit on this witness stand that she targeted scholarship students, that she never apologized to the families she hurt. The defense wants you to believe this was a misunderstanding, but you can't misunderstand your own words when they're recorded. You can't accidentally tell a child to strip or be banned. He paused, looked at each juror. Claire Winslow used her power to humiliate a 16-year-old girl because she didn't think that girl deserved to own nice things. She's done it before. She'll do it again unless you stop her. The evidence proves every element of every charge beyond any reasonable doubt. Do your duty. Hold her accountable. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. When they returned, the foreperson was the retired factory supervisor, a man in his 60s who'd spent 40 years working assembly lines before retiring. He looked at Claire with absolutely no sympathy. On the charge of assault and battery on a minor, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of false imprisonment, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of child endangerment, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of coercion, how do you find? Guilty. Claire's face went white. Ashcroft put a hand on her arm, probably telling her not to react. But she couldn't help it. Her composure shattered completely, tears streaming down her face as the reality hit. She'd lost. The jury had rejected her version, believed the evidence, and convicted her on every count. Marcus felt Ivy's presence behind him. She'd come for the verdict, sitting in the gallery with Mrs. Moss. He turned slightly, caught her eye. She was crying too, but these were different tears. Relief, vindication, justice. Judge Cortez set sentencing for 2 weeks. Court was adjourned. As Marcus gathered his files, reporters rushed from the courtroom to cover the verdict. He could hear them already, calling it a major upset, a stunning conviction of a prominent community figure. But Marcus didn't care about the headlines. He cared that 12 ordinary people had watched a powerful woman hurt a child and decided that power didn't make her untouchable. That was justice. The courthouse steps were chaos. Reporters surrounded Ashcroft, who'd emerge first to control the narrative. His voice carried across the plaza, professional despite the loss. "We're disappointed in today's verdict and will be filing an appeal. Ms. Winslow maintains her innocence and looks forward to vindication at the appellate level." Marcus exited through a side door, avoiding the media scrum. He had no interest in victory laps or sound bites. The verdict spoke for itself. Ivy waited by his car, Mrs. Moss standing protectively beside her. When Marcus approached, Ivy didn't say anything, just stepped forward and hugged him tightly. He felt her shoulders shake, felt 6 years of being strong finally break into the relief of being protected. "It's over," he said quietly. "She can't hurt you anymore." Ivy pulled back, wiped her eyes. "I keep thinking about all the other kids, the ones who didn't have someone like you." "They do now," Mrs. Moss said softly. "This verdict changes things. The club will have to change. They can't ignore this anymore." She was right. The conviction wasn't just personal vindication, it was public record. Every news outlet in the county would cover it. Every family who'd been intimidated into silence would see that Claire Winslow, with all her money and connections and lawyers, had been held accountable. The ripple effects started within hours. That evening, the Lakeshore Country Club board held an emergency meeting. Marcus learned about it later from Derek Pine, who called him after midnight, his voice exhausted but relieved. They voted her out, unanimous. She's no longer president, no longer on the board, no longer a member. They're terrified of liability. 3 families whose kids were targeted by someone they kept in power despite complaints. "Good," Marcus said. "There's more. They're implementing new policies, independent complaint system for scholarship members, mandatory bias training for all board members, zero tolerance policy for discriminatory conduct. They're calling it the Scholarship Student Protection Protocol." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. "That's more than I expected." "It's not enough," Derek said. "Not for what happened, but it's something." The media coverage was relentless for days. Local papers ran front-page stories about the conviction, the pattern of abuse, the systemic failure of the club's board to protect vulnerable students. Editorial boards called for reform. Parents of scholarship students came forward with their own stories, smaller incidents, casual cruelties, the 1,000 subtle ways Claire had made them feel unwelcome. 2 more families contacted Marcus directly, asking if they could file complaints. He referred them to the club's new independent system, explaining that his role as prosecutor was finished, but he made sure Derek knew they were coming, made sure those complaints would be taken seriously. Claire's social empire collapsed faster than Marcus had anticipated. Her name was removed from donor plaques at the hospital foundation. Her husband's development company quietly scrubbed her from their charitable foundation board. Committee assignments disappeared. Invitations stopped coming. The women who'd lunched with her for years suddenly had scheduling conflicts. She'd built her identity on wielding power through social connections and institutional authority. The conviction had shattered both. She was radioactive now. Associating with her meant associating with someone who'd been convicted of abusing children. In the circles she'd dominated for decades, there was no faster path to exile. Marcus watched it all from a distance, feeling nothing resembling satisfaction. He'd never wanted to destroy Claire Winslow. He'd wanted to stop her from hurting children. The social consequences were incidental, natural results of her own actions becoming public record. Sentencing arrived 2 weeks later. Marcus attended, sitting at the prosecution table while Ashcroft made his plea for leniency. Claire had no prior record, he argued. She'd contributed extensively to the community. She'd already suffered tremendous social and reputational harm. Incarceration would serve no purpose. Judge Cortez listened without expression, then delivered his sentence. "Ms. Winslow, you used your position of authority to systematically target and humiliate vulnerable children. You did this repeatedly, over an extended period, without remorse. The court finds that your conduct warrants the maximum penalty allowed under law." He sentenced her to 6 months in county jail on each count to run concurrently. Then he suspended the jail time, converting it to 2 years of supervised probation. The conditions were specific: 200 hours of community service to be performed at a youth mentorship program serving underprivileged students, a $10,000 fine, mandatory counseling addressing bias and abuse of authority, and a permanent restraining order prohibiting contact with Ivy, Bethany, the Henderson family, the Yoon family, or any current or former Ridgemont Prep scholarship students. You will spend the next 2 years serving the very community you targeted, Cortez said. Perhaps that will teach you the empathy you failed to develop on your own. Claire said nothing. Her lawyer helped her stand, guided her from the courtroom. She looked smaller somehow, diminished in ways that had nothing to do with physical size. Marcus didn't stay to watch her leave. He had no interest in witnessing her humiliation. That had never been the point. Outside, the media was waiting again, but Marcus had already decided he wouldn't speak to them. This wasn't his story to tell. It was Ivy's, and Bethany's, and Tyler's, and Minji's. He wouldn't exploit their pain for headlines, but Bethany had different ideas. She stood at the microphone cluster the reporters had set up, Mrs. Moss beside her, and spoke clearly into the cameras. My name is Bethany Moss. I testified in this case because I watched someone with power hurt my friend, and I couldn't stay quiet anymore. The verdict today says that no matter how wealthy or connected you are, you don't get to abuse children. That matters. It matters to every scholarship student who's been made to feel like they don't belong. It matters to every kid who's been told they're not good enough because of where they come from or how much money their parents make. She paused, composed herself. Claire Winslow thought her position made her untouchable. She was wrong, and I hope every other person who uses power to hurt people is watching this and understanding. You're not untouchable either. The reporters erupted with questions. Mrs. Moss stepped forward, ending the impromptu press conference, but Bethany had said what needed saying. Marcus drove home, picked up Ivy from school, and made dinner like it was any other Tuesday. They ate at their small kitchen table, talking about her calculus test and the debate club tournament coming up. Normal things, safe things. After dinner, Ivy went to her room to study. Marcus sat in his home office, staring at the case file he'd close tomorrow. State v. Winslow. Guilty on all counts. Justice served. But justice wasn't just the verdict. It was the policy changes at the club. It was Bethany finding her voice. It was other families knowing they could come forward. It was scholarship students feeling safer, knowing someone would protect them. That was the real victory, not destroying Claire Winslow, but building something better in the space her power had occupied. His phone buzzed, a text from Derek Pine. First complaint filed under new system today. Board took it seriously, investigated immediately. Member who made discriminatory comment has been suspended pending review. The system works. Thank you. Marcus typed back, That's not me. That's the families who were brave enough to speak up. But he knew the truth was more complicated. The families had been brave. Bethany had been brave. Ivy had been brave. And he'd used the tools he had, his knowledge, his position, his understanding of how justice worked, to make sure their bravery mattered. Sometimes that's all justice was, making sure bravery mattered, making sure power had limits, making sure children were protected. He closed the case file, filed it away, and went to check on Ivy. She was wearing Rebecca's Burberry jacket while she studied, the fabric draped over her shoulders like armor. She'd started wearing it again after the verdict, reclaiming it from the humiliation Claire had attached to it. Hey, Dad. Yeah? Mom would have been proud of you. Marcus's throat tightened. She'd have been proud of you too. You were braver than I could have been at 16. Ivy smiled slightly. We made a good team. Yeah, Marcus said. We did. He left her to her studying and returned to the kitchen, where Rebecca's photo sat on the counter, the one of her wearing that same Burberry jacket, smiling at the camera, alive and vibrant and gone. We did right by her, he said quietly to the photo. We protected our girl. The photo didn't answer, but somehow the silence felt less empty than usual. Justice had been served, their family had been protected, and tomorrow life would continue, smaller, quieter, but safe. That was enough. 3 months passed before Marcus truly understood the weight of what they had accomplished. The immediate aftermath of sentencing had been consumed with procedural matters. Ashcroft filed his promised appeal, which Marcus responded to with a brief so comprehensive the appellate court denied it without oral argument. Claire began her community service hours at Riverside Youth Center, a non-profit serving underprivileged teenagers. The director called Marcus once to confirm the court order was legitimate. her voice incredulous that someone like Claire Winslow was being required to mentor the exact population she'd spent years excluding. But the real changes came quietly, in ways Marcus only learned about secondhand. Derek Pine called him on a Wednesday evening in early autumn. "I thought you should know. We had our first scholarship student elected to the Junior Member Advisory Board, a girl named Aisha Kamara. She's 15, brilliant, and she told the board during her nomination speech that she ran because Bethany Moss showed her it was possible to speak up." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. That's good. It's more than good. It's a complete reversal. 6 months ago, scholarship students kept their heads down and tried not to be noticed. Now they're running for leadership positions. The culture's changing. The culture was changing in other ways too. Mrs. Yoon called to tell him Minji had applied to return to the club's junior program. She said she wants to try again. She said if that girl, Ivy, could face what happened to her publicly, Minji could face going back. Tom Henderson sent an email. Tyler had joined the club's robotics workshop, something he'd refused to consider for a year after Claire's accusation. He says it feels different now, says kids don't look at him weird anymore. These small victories accumulated into something larger, a systematic shift in how power operated at Lakeshore Country Club, and by extension, in the broader community. The trial had been public. The pattern evidence had been reported extensively. Other institutions were watching, reassessing their own policies towards scholarship students and low-income families. Ridgemont Prep invited Marcus to speak at their annual ethics seminar. He declined. This wasn't his story to capitalize on, but suggested they invite Bethany instead. They did. She spoke to 300 students about witnessing injustice and choosing to act despite fear of consequences. The school made her speech required viewing for all incoming scholarship students. Marcus returned to his satellite office, to his misdemeanor cases and plea agreements, to the deliberately small life he'd built after Rebecca's death. But something had shifted there too. Other prosecutors started referring him cases involving abuse of authority, institutional misconduct, powerful defendants who thought their position made them immune to consequences. "You're the guy who took down Claire Winslow," a junior ADA said when dropping off a case file. "If anyone can make this stick, it's you." Marcus didn't want to be the guy. He wanted to be Ivy's dad, the quiet one who picked her up at 4 and helped with calculus homework. But he also couldn't ignore that his willingness to use his expertise to protect his daughter had created a template others could follow. Parents didn't have to accept that powerful people were untouchable. They could fight back, and they could win. The Saturday before Thanksgiving, Marcus took Ivy to visit Rebecca's grave. They'd made this trip quarterly since her death, bringing flowers, sitting on the grass, talking to her like she could hear them. Ivy wore the Burberry jacket despite the cold, had worn it so often now that it carried her own scent mixed with whatever remained of her mother's. They placed chrysanthemums at the headstone, Rebecca's favorite fall flower. Then they sat, shoulders touching, watching leaves skitter across the cemetery grounds. "I've been thinking about what happens next," Ivy said quietly. Marcus glanced at her. "What do you mean?" "With the club, with school, with everything." She pulled the jacket tighter around herself. "People look at me differently now. Some of them see me as the girl who stood up to Claire Winslow. Some see me as the DA's daughter who got special treatment. I don't know which one I am." "You're neither," Marcus said firmly. "You're the girl who survived something terrible and had the courage to let it be part of the public record so other kids wouldn't have to survive it alone. That's who you are. But what if I don't want to be defined by what happened? What if I just want to be normal?" Marcus understood that longing, the desire to be invisible, unremarkable, safe in anonymity. He'd lived it for 6 years, deliberately shrinking his life to protect her. But normal had never been an option after Rebecca died. They'd had to build something different, smaller, yes, but also stronger. "You can be whatever you want," he said. "But Ivy, what happened to you mattered. Not because you're my daughter, but because it exposed something broken that needed fixing. You don't have to carry that forever, but you also shouldn't minimize it." She was quiet for a long moment, then leaned her head against his shoulder. "Mom would have handled this better. She always knew what to say." "Your mom would have been furious," Marcus said with a sad smile. "She would have shown up at that club herself, probably embarrassed both of us with how loud she got. Then she would have held you and told you that people who try to make you feel small do it because they're small themselves. Ivy laughed softly. Yeah, that sounds like her. They sat in companionable silence as the afternoon light faded. Marcus thought about the last 6 years, the deliberate smallness, the protective isolation, the way he'd tried to shield Ivy from everything that could hurt her. He'd failed at that. Claire Winslow had hurt her anyway. But in that failure, they'd discovered something. Ivy didn't need to be shielded. She needed to be believed, supported, and given the tools to fight back. That was a different kind of protection, harder, more painful, but ultimately more empowering. Dad? Ivy's voice was small. Do you think it was worth it? The trial, the publicity, everything? Marcus thought about Aisha Kamara running for leadership, about Minji returning to the club, about Tyler joining robotics, about the policy changes and the shifting culture, and all the small ways the world had bent slightly toward justice. Yes, he said, it was worth it. Even though people know now, about us, about what happened. Especially because they know. Secrets protect powerful people, Ivy. Truth protects everyone else. She nodded slowly, processing that. I'm going back to the club next week, for the junior member holiday event. Marcus's first instinct was protective alarm. Was she ready? Would she feel safe? But he caught himself. This wasn't his decision to make. It was hers. You sure? Yeah, Bethany's going, and I don't want Claire Winslow to have taken that space from me forever. I want to reclaim it. Pride swelled in his chest. Then I'll drive you there and pick you up after. You don't have to. I know, but I will anyway. That's what dads do. They stayed until the sun set, until the cemetery workers started making their final rounds. As they walked back to the car, Ivy stopped at the gate and turned back toward Rebecca's headstone. We did okay, Mom, she said quietly. We're gonna be okay. Marcus put his arm around her shoulders and they walked to the car together. That night, after Ivy went to bed, Marcus sat in his home office and drafted an email to the State Bar Association. They'd contacted him weeks ago about presenting at their annual conference on ethics in prosecution. He'd initially declined, uncomfortable with the attention, but Ivy's words at the cemetery had shifted something. Truth protects everyone else? Maybe. Sharing what he'd learned, how to prosecute powerful defendants ethically, how to handle conflicts of interest, how to build cases that withstood claims of bias, maybe that protected other families, other prosecutors facing similar situations, other children who needed someone willing to fight for them. He typed, I've reconsidered your invitation. I'm willing to present on prosecutorial ethics in cases involving personal connections, with a focus on maintaining procedural integrity while pursuing justice for vulnerable populations. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The satellite office, the cheap suits, the modest life, those things weren't hiding anymore. They were choices he made to prioritize Ivy, and there was no shame in that. But within those choices, there was still room to use his expertise to help others. Rebecca would have approved. She'd always believed the best way to honor pain was to transform it into protection for someone else. Marcus closed his laptop and went to check on Ivy one last time. She was asleep, the Burberry jacket draped over her desk chair, her calculus textbook still open beside her bed. He turned off her light, pulled the blanket up to her shoulders, and whispered, Sleep well, sweetheart. You're safe. And for the first time in 6 years, he believed it completely. 6 months after the verdict, Marcus received an envelope marked with the Lakeshore Country Club logo. He almost threw it away unopened. He had no interest in club business, no desire to maintain any connection to the place that had hurt his daughter. But something made him open it. Inside was a formal invitation to the club's annual scholarship recognition ceremony, along with a handwritten note from the new board president, a woman named Patricia Ames, whom Marcus had never met. Mr. Hale, we're establishing an annual award for courage and advocacy in honor of the students who came forward during the Winslow case. The inaugural award will be presented to your daughter and Bethany Moss. We hope you'll both attend. The culture you helped change deserves to be celebrated. Patricia Ames. Marcus showed the invitation to Ivy that evening. She read it twice, then looked at him with uncertainty. Do we go? That's your decision, Marcus said. You don't owe them anything. But other kids will be there. Scholarship students. Maybe it matters that we show up. She was right. Their presence would signal something, that the space was reclaimed, that scholarship students belonged, that speaking up had created lasting change rather than just temporary disruption. "Then we'll go," Marcus said. The ceremony was held on a warm spring evening, the club's main hall decorated with banners celebrating academic achievement. Marcus arrived with Ivy, both of them dressed simply, his off-the-rack suit, her wearing a sundress, and, inevitably, the Burberry jacket. The room was full of families Marcus didn't recognize, scholarship students from multiple schools, board members who looked uncomfortable when they spotted him. Patricia Ames greeted them warmly, thanking them for coming, expressing genuine remorse for what had happened under the previous leadership. Bethany arrived with her parents. The two girls hugged like they'd survived a war together, which, in a sense, they had. Mrs. Moss squeezed Marcus's hand, her eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered, "for making this safe for our children." The ceremony itself was professional and dignified. Awards were presented to students for academic achievement, community service, leadership. Then Patricia took the podium to announce the new award. This year, we're establishing the Courage and Advocacy Award to honor students who demonstrate exceptional bravery in standing up for what's right, even when doing so carries personal cost. This award represents our commitment to ensuring every student at Lakeshore Country Club feels safe, valued, and empowered to speak truth to power. She called Ivy and Bethany to the stage. They walked up together, accepted identical plaques, and stood before the crowd of families and students. Patricia invited them to say a few words. Bethany spoke first, her voice steady. "When I testified, I was scared, but I was more scared of staying silent and watching it happen again to someone else. This award shouldn't be necessary. No student should have to show courage just to be treated with basic respect. But until we live in that world, I hope this award reminds everyone here that speaking up matters, and that when you do, people will listen." Ivy spoke next, quieter, but equally clear. "I didn't want to be part of a trial. I didn't want people to know what happened to me. But my dad taught me that sometimes protecting yourself means protecting everyone like you. The kids who came after me at this club are safer because people know that abuse has consequences. That's worth the cost." The applause was genuine, sustained. Marcus saw tears on multiple faces, parents who understood what their children had been protected from, students who felt the weight of being seen and valued. After the ceremony, families approached Marcus and Ivy. Some thanked them, others shared their own stories, smaller incidents they had experienced or witnessed, moments when they'd felt excluded or diminished, but hadn't known how to fight back. A young girl, maybe 13, approached Ivy shyly. "I just joined the scholarship program. My mom was worried I'd be treated badly because of what happened to you, but everyone's been really nice. Thank you for making it safe for kids like me." Ivy smiled, and Marcus saw Rebecca in that smile, the warmth, the strength, the refusal to let pain make her bitter. "You belong here," Ivy told the girl. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't." As they drove home that evening, Marcus realized something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't about winning anymore. The verdict had been 1 month ago. This was about legacy. The systemic changes that outlasted individual victories, the cultural shifts that protected people who hadn't even arrived yet. Claire Winslow's name had become a cautionary tale throughout the community. "Don't be a Claire Winslow" was shorthand for "don't abuse your power." The trial had created public memory that would outlive all of them, a reminder that wealth and position didn't exempt anyone from accountability. But, more importantly, it had created a template. Other families knew they could fight back. Other institutions knew they'd be held responsible. Other children knew they deserved protection. That was justice that mattered, not just punishing one person, but building systems that prevented the next person from causing the same harm. Marcus pulled into their driveway, turned off the engine, and sat in the quiet darkness with his daughter. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," Ivy said. "I really am." She was. He could see it in the way she carried herself now, the way she'd reclaimed spaces that had tried to exclude her, the way she'd transformed trauma into advocacy without letting it consume her identity. They went inside together. Marcus made tea while Ivy set her plaque on the kitchen counter next to Rebecca's photo. The two images side by side felt right. The mother who'd taught her daughter to be strong, and the daughter who'd proven that strength when it mattered most. Later, after Ivy went to bed, Marcus sat in his home office and looked at the case file one final time before archiving it permanently. State v. Winslow. Guilty on all counts. Justice served. But the real victory wasn't in that file. It was in Aisha Kamara's election to the advisory board, in Minji returning to the club, in Tyler joining robotics, in the 13-year-old girl who felt safe because Ivy had been brave, in every scholarship student who would attend Lakeshore Country Club over the next decade and never know Claire Winslow's name, never experience her cruelty, because systems had been built to protect them. That was the victory that mattered. Not one trial, but the permanent change it created. Marcus closed the file, locked it away, and turned off his office light. Tomorrow he'd wake up early, make breakfast, drive Ivy to school, and return to his satellite office to review misdemeanor cases. The small life, the quiet life, the life he'd chosen to prioritize what mattered most. But within that life, he'd helped build something larger, a community where powerful people faced consequences, where vulnerable children found protection, where justice wasn't just an abstract concept, but a lived reality. Rebecca would have been proud. Marcus was proud too. He checked on Ivy one last time. She was sleeping peacefully, the Burberry jacket still draped over her chair, then went to his own room and finally completely let himself rest. The fight was over. They'd won. And tomorrow, they'd keep building the world that victory had made possible. Subscribe, and don't miss our next story, where we show you what happens when ordinary people refuse to let power go unchallenged. Because every time someone speaks up, every time someone fights back, every time someone proves that accountability matters, the world changes, one verdict at a time. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?